Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Michael Saunders is the founder and managing director at software company Reflow and tech company Reactor15. From a 20-minute Lego animation aged 13 to an art student studying film and video, this early tech pioneer can claim a world first in live streaming 10 stages of a music festival via 32 ISDN lines at a time when most of the world was still operating on dial-up. From early days in web development to securing private equity investment in a burgeoning software company, and a fair smattering of martial arts and ultramarathons thrown in for good measure. What is the Mike Saunders story? Without further ado, let's get into it. So, Mike Saunders, welcome to the Extrology podcast. Great to have you on as our guest today. And without further ado, let's get into it. So I guess always like to start from the early days. So tell me, whereabouts did you grow up?
Torbay in the West Country, a place, to be honest, I always wanted to escape from when I was young. My family are all from London, and so I spent a reasonable amount of time there when I was younger and just wanted to be living in the metropolis rather than sleepy Devon. But I think I appreciate Devon much more now.
Interesting. So, and family-wise, were you brothers, sisters? Were you a big crowd growing up? What was growing up like for you as a result?
Yeah, well, I don't have any brothers. I've got a half sister, but there's a big age gap. So we really didn't spend much time together. And she left home when I was 10. So in many ways, I grew up solo. Yeah, so it was just me and mum and dad. Quite a small family. And
what a great place to grow up. I mean, I think that to your point around, the lure and bright lights of London, but nonetheless, the wild outdoors and all the opportunities that presents for climbing trees and making mischief as a young lad must have been a great place, great experiences, great fun.
Yeah. I certainly appreciate it more now, and I think because I live right out in deepest, darkest Devon now, and I look at my daughter, and it's a nice environment to be. We're right out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I think I look at my own two growing up, and I think, it's just that sort of innocence, and you get to be kids for a long time, I think, or longer, arguably, in the countryside than maybe you do where perhaps you might need to get that sort of street smarts that require of you when you're growing up in the metropolis, so to speak, wherever that may be. I think they get to stay kids a little bit longer, perhaps in the wilds of Devon. So you're back to the spiritual home now?
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So tell me, you growing up in Devon, but certainly the academic path was film and video direction and production, as I understand it. So at what age do you first remember getting into film? And perhaps was there a first film that vividly stands out from your perspective?
Yeah, well, because both my parents are big music and movie fans. And we had a Betamax player as far back as I can remember, and Dad had a 16mm projector in the loft I've got very fond memories of. He's got a home cinema now that he's kind of built up, all with 16mm and 35mm projectors in. And Dad in particular introduced me to movies that I would say were definitely too grown up for me. When I was young, he'd sit me down, and when I would be like 6 or 7 years old, and say, right, we are now going to watch 2001 or Ben-Hur or Jaws or The French Connection. And then afterwards we sit and discuss it in detail. And we do the same in music, really. He'd put an LP on and tell me to sit quietly, listen to the whole thing. There was no messing around, there was no getting up or doing anything else. It'd be like, you have to listen to it. And then afterwards you can talk about it, And I think that was quite a big influence on me, because I ended up seeing a lot of films that perhaps a lot of my peers hadn't seen. And I still think that probably 2001 was a huge influence on me. I remember going into school and one of my friends saying to me, "Oh, what's your favourite film?" And I said, 2001. I mean, oh God, that's really boring. But I don't know. It really sort of impacted me. And of course, Star Wars. I wanted to watch that over and over and over again. And so yeah, it's I think Dad absolutely got me into films. And by the time I was 10, I wanted to act and I wanted to make movies. And I was in plays throughout school. I joined amateur dramatic clubs and I did theatre, and I did theatre and media A levels. My theatre teacher wanted me to try for RADA, but by that time, I just really wanted to make movies. So when I was 13, Dad bought a video camera and we just made movies, and I made animations, and my magnus opus was this 20-minute animation using Lego. It took me like 4 years on and off to make, but that was, I think, the movie that got me into film school. And from there, it was just kind of, that was all my focus, really.
So if you go back to 2001, what was it about that movie that you remember that inspired you to the extent that it did?
I think it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And I still look at it now and think that every single frame within it you could pause and stick up on the wall and frame. It's a beautiful film. And I think Stanley Kubrick's movies in general are all masterpieces. And what was really interesting about it, I think at the time, and I think we've been indulged with more intelligent science fiction movies since, but at the time it was certainly one of the most clever and real science fiction movie I'd ever seen. Because it genuinely tries to be as scientific as possible. Its quietness and its beauty, I think it's a striking movie, and its soundtrack, of course, which was again unlike anything at the time. So it was, it was. I think it's an amazing piece of work, and I think that a lot of people watch it and think, oh well, it's what's it trying to say, and what's all the end about, and so forth. But yeah, Dad and I would spend a lot of time talking about that. And philosophizing about what we think it all meant, and whether we were on track or not, who knows? But I think for me, that was, maybe it was more than just the experience of the movie, but just spending time with my dad and kind of going through that. And we still do that today.
Fantastic. I think it's a really interesting insight. If we bring this, you think even of the concept, here we are in 2020 and what a year this has been. But if you look at the way that we now, broad sweeping statement, but generally consume content, whether that be film, whether that be music, everything seems to have been condensed into bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
You think actually to the I guess as a skill, what you might have learned from sitting down with your father and as you, to your point, listening to an album. If you, I think at the way in which we consume music today, where we listen to a track or an excerpt and we skip on and we're on to the next one before that there's that kind of immediacy of the hit you get from the dopamine of the latest release or whatever it might be. Whereas to your point, Nen, you would have learned so much, I would imagine, from truly understanding in depth, the production process and the art, if you like, of the creation, as opposed to the sensations that you derive as a consequence of watching.
Yeah, no, totally.
So tell me, so a Lego movie. So you make a 20-minute animation using Lego figures. Well, tell me a bit about how did that come about?
Well, I love Lego. Always collected it, still collect it. And I guess that it was where I grew up when I started doing that at 13. I didn't really have anybody around me who was interested in films. And so I needed some actors, and so I had these I had minifigures. so that was the easiest way I could make a big production movie, because I had everything there that I needed to do it. You just needed to take your time, and it took a long time, and I learned quite a lot through the process. And you have to be extremely patient, and of course, then if you knock anything, that's it. You need to sort of do it all again. But it's just everything I needed was right there to be able to create the scenes and be able to do all the special effects. But yeah, the movie itself was called Time Balance. And it was about this professor who built a time machine, and then he manages to mess up time, and he sort of destroys this delicate world between the Lego world and the real human world, you know, and there was a big apocalypse at the end. I rewatched it recently. It's actually not a bad film. It's a bit shabby at the seams, but, you know, not bad for a 13 to 16-year-old.
So you still have a copy?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. On VHS, knocking about.
That's terrific. Terrific. So I guess it strikes me, as much as what you said, it's an interesting, and not to make any assumption, but it's an interesting link between, one of the questions that struck me was that your early career as a creative director and web developer, I might argue, evidence, the creativity that you evidence even from that film production at a very, in your teens, but creativity, web development seems a natural evolution in terms of, I guess, again, coming back to how we create and consume content. It seems a natural path to have followed. But what was tell me about that early career. Is it you move post-study film and video direction and production into creative direction and web development? How did that journey come about? What was the story?
So when I was growing up, I was, as well as being into film and as well as acting and all that kind of stuff, I also, my parents are both quite creative and good with their hands. And I was always sort of making models and drawing and illustrating and all that kind of thing. So when I got into film and went to film school, I was really enjoying the whole thing, everything from directing and acting and doing all the special effects and creating all the makeup and so forth. I couldn't quite decide exactly where I wanted to go, but I loved the whole experience. And I think that it was a heavily practical degree, and when we weren't making movies for the course, we were working on other students' films, so it sort of fitted my love of sort of relentlessly doing stuff. And I made this film in the last year of uni with some buddies, which was this 5-minute trailer for a feature film we wanted to put together. And at the end of the course, we were going through sort of endless rounds of rewriting on this movie, whilst also trying to work out how we were going to fund it. Because we were pretty broke, to be honest, and in a lot of debt after doing this very expensive film course. So anyway, this is 1997, and there's this thing called the internet, which is all very exciting and seemed to offer this way for us to easily talk about what we wanted to do, and maybe even raise some funds. So we learned how to build websites. This was something we just learned on the side. We found this book and just kind of digested it and worked out how to build websites. And one of these friends, after uni, had moved back home at the end of the course and had ended up trying to get a music event off the ground to support his parents' charity that they were doing. And apparently he'd met this guy who was going to fund it. And he says to us, look, you guys are broke. Why don't you come down here and you can work for me and you can help me, and also you can build my website for me. So we were like, yeah, brilliant, So we went down there, and this guy with all the money just disappears. We were all pretty naive, really. So we'd kind of done up the office and got ourselves all ready, and then he just, he's just disappeared. So we were wondering what to do. And of course, well, we can build websites. So we started a business designing and building websites, all with this sort of understanding that we would do this until we had some money, and then we would work on our film at the same time. But it was this, it wasn't easy to build, to sell websites in 1997. We had absolutely no business acumen whatsoever. I mean, we were just a bunch of art students, really. So it was just making it up as we went along. Had you
any coding, any background from a technical perspective?
No.
Had you that self-taught, entirely self-taught?
No, all self-taught. So yeah, I mean, we'd learned how to do it, and some of the other guys learned a bit more sort of heavy-duty coding, and I picked up Photoshop for the first time, which of course back then was, pretty basic. And so we were very much sort of making it up, really just to make ends meet, because also, I think, being art students, the idea of going and getting a proper job, that seemed abysmal, couldn't possibly do that. So we, for a couple of years, we were just scrabbling around, and we didn't make very much money, but gradually we managed to get some bits of work on board. And we also started, because of our interest in film, we started to look at broadcasting through the web as well.
Which must have been, I'm trying to scratch, if I go back to 97 and, I think of websites, things like, I don't know, Ask Jeeves from a search perspective might have been around. I'm trying to think what the world looked like.
Yeah, like Alta Vista and
yes, and
early days of eBay
and dial-up and all those
Amazon.
sorts of, yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Was there any broadcast media at the time?
Well, yeah, a little bit. So you had the Real Media player and you had the Windows player at that time.
Yeah,
but they were tiny. Video was tiny. It was like, an inch and a half across, that kind of thing. And of course, nobody wanted to pay for it. It was also such early days, sort of cowboy days. But we were sort of determined that this was something we wanted to be able to sort of push, really. So basically, what we did is we managed to blag our way into doing a broadcast for this festival called the Lizard Eclipse Festival, which happened in 1999 over the eclipse. And because we thought, well, we want to make a big deal of this, and kind of show off what we think we can do with this, we decided that we were going to attempt to broadcast live from all 10 stages for the whole 5 days of the festival. Which, if I think back at this now, that's pretty ambitious.
Even now, that's an ambitious undertaking, right?
Well, these days, it's much, much easier to do. Back then, it was kind of bonkers, really. I still remember BT turning up on site at the Lizard Festival and building us a rack of 32 ISDN lines. It took them all day to build this thing. Yeah. And we actually managed to break the Real Media network at one point during this sort of operation. But basically on the final days of doing it, we got all 10 stages broadcasting out. And I don't know for sure, but it's possible it was a first. Because I don't know anybody else that had done anything like that before. That it was always like a single stream or whatever. But to do, 10 at once, it totally crippled us financially. But we got quite a lot of PR out of it actually, and that was the bit that kind of sort of spiraled and made the business finally start to make a bit of money. So it took us a couple of years, but we did that, and we, off the back of it, we built this piece of software which we called Live Reality, which I think is an awful name, but at the time we thought it was brilliant, which combined basically the video stream and a chat box and a zone for news, as well as conference slides. I mean, it was pretty rickety, to be honest, but it was quite cutting edge at the time. And we ended up doing these regular broadcasts for Tiscali, and we even set up a service for an Australian conference firm, which their first broadcast was out from the Sydney Opera House in 2000. And, things were really starting to happen. And I think, all of our, everything we'd learned from film and video and everything was all sort of coming together in this sort of like melting pot of the web and broadcasting and stuff. And also what started to happen is we started to get in, because, this is like 2000, when we started to get in all these .coms to build. And this was brilliant. They all had these slightly bigger budgets. But the problem was that it all started to spiral out of control a little bit, and because we couldn't keep up with demand, and our customers increasingly wanted to do things that pushed web tech at the time. And we didn't know how to say no, because, as I said, we didn't have any business acumen. We were starting to learn a little bit, but we were missing targets. And then customers started to stop paying us because the internet bubble burst and they didn't have any money anymore. So basically we got to 2002 and that was it. It was over. we called it a day and everyone sort of limped off. But I inherited the half or dozen or so good remaining customers, because none of my colleagues wanted to know. Like, one of them went off to Thailand and just sort of had a nervous breakdown there, and one of them went off and joined a games company and so forth. I said I still had this little group of customers. I said, the good ones. And I said, well, look, I'll just take them if everyone's cool. And they'll be like, yeah, fine. And my partner and I moved down to, we wanted to stay in the West Country, and we ended up moving down to Exeter. And I sort of ended up working briefly for this design agency, which was actually quite good. It was my first proper job, I'd say, really. And it was there that I kind of learned about, how to properly design things. It was, I was like, oh, right, I've been doing it wrong all this time. But in the evenings and the weekends, I was looking after that little collection of customers. And then I gained a few more. And
Why did you keep them? What made you keep? What, to your point, your colleagues disappeared off to other things.
Well, it was pocket money, really.
Okay. I was going to say, I was interested. What was it about you that made you actually this? I'm gonna retain it. You could have. I would imagine you could have walked away and started again, or done something completely different. But you didn't. Something made you, for want of a better expression, something made you hang in there.
I think that actually, most of all, it was what actually ended up happening. I always had this sort of sense in the back of my mind that the idea of being employed seemed contrary to everything I'm all about, really. And so doing my own thing was just my way of keeping that in place. And it got to this place, I'd worked at this other agency for about a year, and my sort of nighttime and weekend work was just getting so big that I stopped the day job and started Reactor.
I was going to say, what was the inspiration behind? So would you say Reactor was a conscious decision, therefore, and what was the inspiration behind it? Or was there a sort of eureka moment that you went, right, this is it, I'm going for it now?
I'll be honest. What was really funny is, I recall I was talking about that movie I wanted to write. I never got back onto the movie, and then, here we are, 2004, quite a few years later, and I thought, you know what, if I've got enough now, I think, with these little group of customers that I'm looking after, with my new little agency I've set up, I could probably have time to write that film. You remember that film I wanted to write? I said to my wife, yeah, I'm going to do that now. And of course, all that happened was that I set my own agency up and it just got busy. And of course, I never wrote that film, And yeah, I just... to start with, I thought, I want to keep this small, just a little thing on the side. And before I knew it, I was about sort of 3-4 years in, and I had, I think, about 12 freelancers working for me. And it's quite tricky managing lots of freelancers. And it actually, to be honest, became quite stressful and very, very busy. And I was working really long hours. And it was good, I had lots of new customers, all of which had come through recommendations. Because that first group of customers I had, which I feel immensely lucky to have got, were very good at recommending to me.
So you those first clients that you had, they obviously saw something in you. They believed in you. They believed in what it was that you were trying to achieve. What do you think that was?
Well, I think that I hope that I've always given a certain amount, been. I had good integrity. So I think I've always sort of looked after my customers quite well and cared. And I think that's really key in business. And I think that I was able to offer, because I'd come from this world where I'd done both design and coding, I was able to sit quite nicely in the middle. And so often those worlds, especially in web design these days, the synergy has gotten much, much better. But in the early days, and this was still really early days of the internet, that was often at odds. And I think that what I offered in Reactor would be quite good at bringing those things together quite nicely, really. And I could understand a designer just as well as I could understand a developer. And so could sort of manage that process really nicely.
Interesting. So 16 years on or so, 16 years on the Reactor journey, what have been the biggest challenges you faced along the way?
Gosh, well, I've been many, really. And I think a lot of that has really been to do with my lack of business acumen at the beginning and being, as I said, just really an arty student, really. And so I've really had to pick up a lot of things as I've gone along and made a lot of mistakes and kind of gone round in circles. And I think that, managing a bunch of freelancers I did for the first sort of 5-6 years was very complex. And I ended up hiring from 2011, and that was definitely a better road to go down. But then I made a lot of mistakes with managing people. I think that's one of the toughest things in business. And I got wrong quite a lot, I'd either be too nice or the opposite. And I think that also learning how to manage customer expectations. It's so easy to sort of say, yeah, we can do that, and then going off piste quite a lot. And we'd always kind of deliver on time, but sort of end up to our own detriment, really, kind of going over budget and so on in the early days. But, you gradually learn how to hone that in more and more, I think, and get better at it.
Had you any kind of business sort of family? You mentioned your mother and father growing up, but they obviously had that sort of creative influence that you alluded to. But had you any business in the background, sort of family, friends, anyone you could literally all self-taught?
Yeah, my both my parents were self-employed, and I think they were really important influences on me when I was growing up because of that, and because of their sort of get up and get on with it kind of attitude with everything, which was definitely really, really important. I also very much learned from them a sense of kind of tackling things on my own, and I think that was a good thing. Because it made me I didn't really want to turn to anybody, but it was also a bad thing because I didn't want to turn to anybody. So I've learned now that collaboration and being open and listening and working with other people is a really, really important thing. But I think back then I wasn't really very good at that.
Do you think that's the biggest lesson that you've learned along the way, that focus around working with others?
Yeah, definitely.
I was going to say, is there anything you'd have done differently looking back?
Yeah, lots. I think not having a plan is also, I think that's possibly I think a lot of businesses fall down on that, and I think my old businesses definitely did. I think that far too many businesses are reactive, and I think you have to have a plan and constantly refer back to that plan and to decide what to do and what's important and what not to do. I think it's even more important, where to do business and where not to do business. And then you can sort of stay nicely sort of laser focused on it. We never had a plan at the start of my career, right? And I never had a plan with Reactor. Things just sort of happened. Sometimes that's a good thing, but I think you end up sort of going round in circles a little bit,
Interesting. So is there one decision that you made with Reactor that has proved pivotal to your success?
Yeah. Bringing my business partner Lee into the business and getting into apps. There was no doubt that was a massive sort of new direction for us. So yeah, I started to employ in 2011. We were doing design, and we were doing web, and we were doing online marketing and that kind of thing. And then I ended up sort of bumping into an old buddy of mine who I'd not seen for years. So I kind of bumped into him every now and again, like at a festival or something like that, but hadn't really sort of stayed in touch. And he was a guy that I actually went to college with way back in A-level days. And he'd always been sort of really, really heavily into programming and computers. And it turns out that he'd moved to Exeter and that he'd set up his own IT firm. And that had been doing really very well, but he was. I think the problem with IT is that the only time people call you is when they're moaning, And I think he was finding that really challenging, And he said to me, "I'd really like to get back to what I really love, which is developing and programming, and I think the apps they're going to be huge. So I'd really like to get into it. Would you, be interested in doing that within Reactor?" And I was certainly, let's explore that. And he came on board, and we started to offer it out as a service within our business, and it kind of got jumped on really nicely. It was just the right time. And what we did, I think very, very sensibly, is that we didn't just go down the path of developing an app for one particular platform. What Lee wanted to do was to be able to build a framework that would allow us to be able to program in one language and then to be able to spit out automatically to both iOS and Android. And that's quite complex to do, and it's a big deal. And you've got to be able to deal with lots and lots of different sort of platforms as well within that, various different mobile phones, different sizes of mobile phone. All of this we sort of, he and his team sort of developed out. And we managed to get some work with the NHS. Bizarrely, Sue, we were really interested in virtual reality and still are. And we'd written this blog article about our interest in that. We got this inquiry from this guy who was equally interested in it, who was a GP down at Torbay Hospital. And he said, let's explore what we can do with virtual reality, and we ended up having this chat with him, and then he introduced us to a few other people, and they said, well, we really want to get into doing some apps for the NHS. So we started to explore doing some work with them. And what they wanted to be able to do was have apps that could ultimately be content managed. So they would work offline, but that the content could be updated, much the same as you have with a content management system, which runs a website. Again, this is pretty new in 2011, 2012. So we developed a system that would plug into our framework that we built that would allow that to happen. And we got some, continue to get work off the back of that, which was really good for a little while. And I think that Lee definitely was, a pivotal part of making that all happen and bringing that all together. And he's still my business partner to today.
And was that pure serendipity? Was it just a fortuitous chance meeting, or had you specifically reached out to him and said, this could be an interesting partnership?
No, I just met him in a club. I was DJing there, actually, funnily enough. I was doing some DJing in the latter part of the noughties. I'm a big music fan, and again, very much influenced by my parents. And yeah, I was doing quite a lot of DJing, and he was just there on a night. We were just like, "Hey, how you doing?" And and he said, "I've just moved to Exeter," and then we just sort of stayed in touch a little bit. And he said, "I hate what I'm doing. Let's do something else." So yeah, very much, amazing.
Fantastic. Well, great story. So you launched Reflow in 2016. Is that right? Was it 2016 that you launched Reflow? So what was the story behind Reflow from kind of idea to launch? Where did it stem from?
Yeah, so actually that follows neatly on from the story I was just telling. We were building out these NHS apps, and we were working with a fairly big firm who deals with highways down in Devon, doing some website work with them. And Lee had also been looking after a lot of their IT for many years. So we had a good relationship with them. And they said that they had this. I met, that's right, with the MD one day, and he was asking me what we were up to and how everything was going in Reactor. And I said, "Oh well, this is what we've been doing for the NHS." And he said, "Well, we've got this problem where we're losing data. We're not getting data back from our guys in the field." And he talked to Lee about it a little bit as well, and he sort of suggested, well, you guys must be able to do something with this technology you've got for the NHS. So we kind of tinkered away a little bit, and we started to look at the way that not only could we push data to our apps, but possibly we could pull data from it as well. So we could incorporate these forms that they would normally be sort of paper forms that their staff would have on a roadside when they're digging up holes or laying down a road or something, and for that data to come back to the content management system, if you like, and for them to be able to view that content and be able to turn it into PDFs from there. So we put something together, and they were very pleased with it. And I was talking to one of our other customers who was who ran a firm doing landscaping and gardening. We were doing a website for them, and I said, do you have this particular problem? And they went, "Yes, we do." And I said, we've developed this system. And they said, "We would love to see that." And we went in, Lee and I, and we did a demo of what we'd done. And they absolutely loved it. And they said, "Yeah, we'll be on board for that." And then we got this phone call almost exactly the same time out of the blue from a civils firm. And they said, "We've got this problem. We're losing paperwork, and we really need something to manage our guys on site." And I said, "Do you know these guys?" And they said, "Yeah, we do." I said, "Well, have they been talking about it?" "No." And I said, "Well, funnily enough, we're developing something for them." And they went, yeah, we want to see it. So it was amazing. Within just sort of like about 5-6 months or so, we had this little group of customers. And of course, they really led the development of the system in that early time, because we were very much, what we developed was good, but of course they were like, yeah, it's good, but it would be really neat if it also does this, this, and this. And then the big change, the big moment kind of came, because we continued with Reactor and we were fiddling around with a few other things as well. And this big moment sort of came in when we were introduced to South West Highways, who were obviously quite a big firm in Devon. And they wanted to look at it, and they really liked it, and they took it up. And they were talking about sort of 50 plus users on the system. So that was when Lee and I kind of looked at each other and said, we've really got something here. We had like 7 or 8 customers by this point. The way that we charged for it was based on a monthly recurring revenue per user. And so we thought, well, we really need to take this seriously, because we're just doing this as a kind of sub thing within Reactor. We could probably make a business out of this. So we started to look around, because we knew the only way we'd really be able to do it properly is to be able to get investment on board, because we'd need to get the right team in, and we didn't have the funds within Reactor to do that. So I'd happened, again, a serendipitous moment. I'd been introduced to this guy who was 20 years my senior, who's definitely been around the block a few times, been managing director of several business, financial director within a few blue chip businesses. And he was doing some consultancy work. And he saw what we'd done, and said that he could introduce us to a London funding firm and get us some serious money on board. And I kind of laughed at the time. He said, I think we could get you $500,000. And I thought, yeah, right. Well, let's see. But I trusted him, and he took me to London, and I met with these guys, and they helped, with him. He really helped me to develop a proper business plan for the business, and put together my deck. And we pitched to a bunch of investors, and I was very luckily introduced to some really interested parties who put the money, and we raised the money in just a couple of months. That was in 2018. So we went from 3 people that were involved in reflow in Reactor to then going up to 10 people. And I got on board as sales manager and marketing manager, and we got a few more developers in, and it's growing exponentially. We're now 16. We've now got over 100 customers. Over 50 of those are in highways, which is where we sort of first started. And we've just done our second round of funding.
And how did you feel that day when you were told that the funding rounds had been successful? Because I always think it's an interesting, when chatting with, I've been fortunate to have worked with business owners for many years. And I think the challenge for many is, most with whom I've engaged, let me put it this way, most of them recognize, at least intellectually, that in order that they might scale, at some point, they're going to have to involve others, whether that's in the form of a business partner, whether that's in the form of external investment, senior management, whatever form it may take. Ultimately, that ability to scale is dependent on your ability to attract the right resources, whether that's people and financially. Most of them, I think it's fair to say, intellectually will acknowledge that. Emotionally, taking that leap and allowing that to happen when you've so much of your own identity wrapped up in that business, which it's not easy to step away and say it's a business. And actually, how you then subsequently scale whilst maintaining the kind of secret sauce that enabled you to succeed in the first place. All of these are I think many of the challenges that entrepreneurs and business owners face. Has that been your own experience, and how have you overcome it, do you think?
I think that coming to it after all those years of doing other things helped a great deal. I wouldn't have dealt with it very well if it had happened to me when I was younger, I don't think. It came to me at just the right point in my life when I'd learnt enough. And I think that I was also very, very lucky to not only have this amazing mentor, but also to have brought on board some investors who have taken quite a nice sort of arm's length approach. Which has been, really refreshing, because I wasn't sure what kind of experience I'd have. So they've really sort of said, look, we trust you, and especially once we'd done about sort of 6 months of trading after we got the investment on board, it was all going in the right direction. And I think that they just said, look, you're running the business, you crack on with it. And I'd also, I think, got to a place where I'd realised that it was better to have a small part of something big. I think that it's very easy to get this idea in your head that you don't want to give away equity to your business. I think that's quite naive, and I think that it's if you think about all the big players. I read Elon Musk's biography earlier on this year, and it's really telling that he made his initial fortunes by selling a business that I think in the end he only had about 5% of it or something, but he still made a lot of money out of it. And I think, but it's all about the investors that put the money in at the beginning and so forth. And I think he did the right thing. Whereas there's no point in sort of holding back. If you want it to grow, you need that support, I think. And this is that thing I was referring to about how I think it's sort of embracing the people around you and getting everybody involved is quite important. I don't know whether that answers your question.
No, it does. But I think what's interesting for me is ultimately picking the right people. Your point, there will be those within any proposition that might arguably have a range of investors from which to select, for example. In much the same way as you go through a hiring process, you might have a range of candidates from which to select. Picking the right one, if gotten wrong is so costly, if gotten right can be so advantageous. But it's these are the big decisions.
Yeah, I've been very lucky because, of course, when you want to attract an investor, you don't get an opportunity to pick unless you're very, very lucky. If somebody comes on board and says, hey, I'll give you that money, it's like, okay, great. It doesn't matter who they are, And I guess I've been really lucky to pick up the right kind of people who work. And obviously, one of the nice things about having investment, having that cash, is that you've got that runway. You've got that time to be able to pick the right people. But you don't know from a CV and from a few interviews what somebody's going to be like. So it really does come down to gut instinct. And I guess that just honing that gut instinct is maybe a skill that Lee and I have learnt and gotten better at, perhaps.
So what does success mean to you, Mike? What does it look like for you, first and foremost?
You see, I guess I never used to be particularly good at celebrating or kind of understanding what success is. For me, it was always like, just keep doing, keep making, keep creating. And I think for me, that's really what drives me in a way. Is I'm not very good at sitting still. And so if it's all going in the right direction in accordance with the plan, that's brilliant, that's successful. But, I think we've already been successful in achieving what we've done now. And I think I just stopped and recognized that only recently. It's very easy to sort of feel like, you move on to the next thing. And I think people like me, that's very easy to do. You don't really know when to stop and smell the roses and go, oh yeah, look what we've done. That's pretty neat.
But I guess interestingly for me anyway, it's a consistent theme. I've seen so many, again, back to what I said earlier about having been fortunate to have met and worked with many people such as, who've been on similar-ish or similar journeys to the one you're describing. And there's a consistent theme throughout of that, that rarely in my experience do they, even if they do pause, they certainly don't pause for long before they're really moving on. So there might just be an acknowledgement that says, yep, okay, good job. What do we learn from it? What could we have done better? Right, next, and on we go. And there's that constant sense of there is no finish line.
Yeah.
I think that's what's interesting. It's every day you get up and you go again. And I think, and when you study those sort of, I think success is an interesting concept because I think it's a uniquely personal one. I think it means different things to different people. But I think when you study those people we perceive to be successful, you mentioned Elon Musk, for example. I was thinking of a story I'd read of Sir Alex Ferguson with respect to celebrating success, and the fact that he literally would allow the players at Manchester United when they were winning all before them to have their night of celebrating the trophy, but literally the following morning he's back on the training ground in his office thinking, right, what do we need next season? We go again. So I think that it seems a consistent theme with those that maybe success is not the right word, but that those in the goals that they've set for themselves have achieved those goals are very quickly moving on to the next one. It does appear to be a consistent theme.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because you've just reminded me actually of I remember when the investment had been done, the money was in the bank. I remember telling Lee, and his response, and he always has beautifully dry responses to these things, was simply like, brilliant, now we've got to deliver. Which is, absolutely true in many ways. It was like, yeah, should we crack open that champagne? Well, we'll do that when we've got to this point, and you can put off opening that bottle over and over again. It just gathers dust because of exactly what you're talking about.
So what drives you?
I think experiencing. I like doing stuff. I love building things. As I said, I'm not very good at sitting still. I write myself a list at the start of every year of what I'm going to try and achieve, and I come back to it regularly to make sure I'm sort of on target, with a review at the end of the year. I'm a very optimistic person. I'm very upbeat. I do sort of enjoy everything I'm doing. So I guess just doing stuff, really, that's probably what drives me. It's quite exciting what I'm doing with my business. So yeah, I don't have any problem getting up in the morning and cracking on.
Do you think is it the creative in many ways? It's that creating of something, to your point around doing things, but much of which involve creating something. You're creating a business, creating film, creating even DJing, creating experiences for people. There's a very creative theme, and I don't wish to be so. That's an easy observation to make on the basis of the creative studies that you enjoyed at an early age from an academic perspective. But there's a constant theme throughout of creating something is what appears to be providing much of the satisfaction for you.
Oh yeah, definitely building stuff.
Yeah, building stuff. So what about away from work though? So what does Mike Saunders do you relax? I mean, if you, to your point around not sitting still, what do you do away from the office? I'd imagine that movement in some way, shape, or form is very much what's involved.
Yeah, I like to do lots of things. I love hanging out with my friends and family. I live in this tiny village in the middle of nowhere, and I'm very lucky to have a group of friends here that are of similar age and interest, so we hang out a lot. I love music. Spotify is like the best thing ever. I collect vinyl. I listen to audiobooks a lot, and I love building Lego. As I said, I have amassed about 250,000 bricks of Lego.
Wow.
I really enjoy DIY. I'm gradually doing up our old house. I love bodyboarding. I watch movies, of course. I like reading, but I love running, and I love martial arts. That's become a sort of big part of my life.
What martial arts do you practice? Is that the right word? What do you practice? What martial art do you participate in?
I do karate and kickboxing.
Wow. Interesting. At what age did you get into that?
I've been doing it for 12 years. So, I discovered that in quite an interesting way. So through I was never, because my family was just not sporty at all. And I just didn't really like sport very much when I was young. And I sort of think that I thought that I didn't like sport when I was young because nobody that sort of highly influenced me was into sport, if you know what I mean. And so, I mean, particularly through my 20s, I didn't really do anything. I did the odd bit of running and stuff, but didn't really do very much. And then when in those sort of early days of Reactor, especially when I was sort of managing all those freelancers and stuff, I was finding myself quite sort of stressed out. And I ended up meeting this guy through this other friend of mine, and we were just up late one night chatting, and I said to him, oh, I was getting a bit stressed out with work and stuff, and I said, I've been getting quite a tight, sort of pain in my stomach. He said, that's interesting. I used to get that. And he said, you want to do some martial arts? He said, that changed everything for me. And I was like, oh, because I'd always sort of liked the idea, really like sort of Kung Fu movies and stuff like that. But always been a little bit worried about going and starting, especially karate. Because I always had this idea that a karate class would have, the guy from the Karate Kid, the mean guy, the Karate Kid, who would just, you'd walk in and he'd be like, this dojo does not know defeat, does it? And he'd be like really scary. So I'd always avoided it. So he said, no, come along. He said, I've been doing it for some years and it's really sorted out my sort of stress and stuff. So it took me a while to pluck up the courage, to be honest. And I was also incredibly unfit. So I thought I'd take up running again. And I remember sort of doing about half a mile of running and very nearly sort of fainting. And so got myself together a little bit, arrived at the class, and we did the warm-up, and I very, very nearly passed out just in the sort of first 2 minutes of the warm-up. It was brutal. But I was like, hey, this is actually pretty cool. And I kept going back and got really, really into it, and it became such a big part of my life. Most importantly, it absolutely unstressed me. And I realised afterwards that sport was something what had I been doing? How come I'd missed out on this amazing, important thing in my life, And it became such a big part of my life. And haven't looked back since. It's been brilliant.
What do you think you've learned from martial arts that you've been able to apply in business?
Meditation. Because when you're in the moment, with anything like squash or tennis or when you're sparring or whatever it might be, when you're in there, you cannot think about anything else. If you're sparring in the ring, you've got to be absolutely in that moment. That is something that I think in today's life we're really quite rubbish at. And that's a wonderful thing. And of course it gets everything sort of moving. So afterwards you just feel like $1 million as well. Even though it's full on and brutal and tough at the time, and when you're in it, it's like the most natural high you can possibly get as well. So it's that's a fab thing. And discipline. I think that martial arts, and I think again this applies to whatever sport. If you're really into a sport, that discipline to get better and to keep going, and the stamina required. So I in order to support my martial arts, in order to support being able to just last the time in the ring, I really started to get into running and into long distance running. And so I started then to get into doing half marathons and marathons. And this summer I did, I'd always had this idea of kind of running. My parents live about 35 miles away. And this summer with lockdown, I just thought, well, the roads are clear. I could do it. Why don't I try that? So I gradually sort of worked up and up and up through over a period of time, getting longer and longer runs. And in like June, I ran to my parents. It was amazing, and then my wife came and picked me up. I couldn't walk. And I think that's something that you can take. It's certainly influenced my business world as well, and what I'm doing, because it's that, when you're in the middle of a marathon, or when you're sparring and you're in the middle of a fight, it's the ability to say, no, I'm not going to stop. It's just one foot in front of the other. Just keep going. No, don't stop. Just keep going. You just got to do that. You know what I mean? And that's that I've learned from it, definitely.
Absolutely. It's a really clumsy analogy, but what runs through my head is that if you draw parallels with business, almost the martial art is that short, sharp bursts of very focused, very intense, very disciplined energy.
Yeah. And
the marathon is that, that resilience, to your point, that one foot in front of the other, which is business. Inevitably, it is a series. Someone once said to me, I think it's a marathon, but it is a marathon run at a series of sprints. You do these little bursts and you slow down a little bit, then another little burst, and you slow down a little bit. But ultimately, it's a long journey. There is no, I think that's part of the challenge of the world in which we now live. That if you look back to what we said from the outset around content, but the immediacy of outcome. So much of what we hear of success in business today is, Facebook paying $1 billion for Instagram when it was 14 people in a room and 5 minutes old. That's success in business these days. That's a rare occurrence, absolutely a rare occurrence. It is a marathon. So no, I think that's fascinating. So in terms of I guess the advice that you would give a 21-year-old Mike Saunders, if you look back to that art student who the thought of going to work for the man was putting on a suit and tie and getting a, in inverted commas, a proper job, as it might have been back in those days, would have been abhorrent. What advice would you give the 21-year-old self?
Listen, stop and think and learn. Take time to smell the roses. Stop worrying, because I was always worrying. Get to a martial arts class. You'll love it. And it will help with the above. I think that's what I'd say, really. I think you've got to go through stuff in order to be able to come out the other side. So, but there are tools and things you can pick up along the way to help you with that.
Interesting. So what does the future look like, first and foremost, for Reactor15 and Reflow?
Oh, gosh. Well, Reflow's growing exponentially. I feel pretty lucky. We've got a business providing a service that is needed more than ever right now. It's been this year. I count myself incredibly lucky because we've got a business that's actually been very useful to people through, obviously the pandemic, and we have a roadmap of new features for over a year to come, and we're starting to look at providing the service globally. So it's exciting, and to be honest, that's where I'm fairly focused on at the moment.
And does that therefore leads into the question that inevitably I would ask as to what the future looks like for Mike Saunders, but the here and the now, as you describe it, is very much focused on the success that you can enjoy with Reactor and Reflow. Yeah,
definitely. I'm quite happy with where I'm going with that. I'd like to do a 100-mile run.
Would you?
I'd love to. Yeah. I'd like
Why?
to. Why?
What's the appeal from your perspective?
I don't know. For the same reason that I don't like to sit still, really. I guess it's just, that would be neat to do. Let's see if we can do that kind of thing. It's quite fun to sort of push yourself, really. I don't know. Anybody I mention it to, they're like, why do you want to do that? I ran up endeavours and back down again last year, I think it was now. And I was like, oh yeah, I'd quite like to get into doing that, It'd be quite fun to see how many mountains I could run up and down. So it's the time to train for these things that is challenging, really. So yeah, just personally, I'd quite like to do more of that kind of thing. But yeah, in terms of the business, there's a lot of work to do. Yeah, so I'm fully into that at the moment.
Well, I think it's a fabulous story, Mike. I really appreciate you sharing it with me this afternoon, and indeed for our listeners. I look forward to watching on as Reflow and React continue to go from strength to strength, and my very best for your continued success. And I'll look forward to maybe when you do get to a point at which you decide to pop that cork with Lee. Maybe we could share it on the finish line of a 100-mile race. I would, of course, carried it to the finish line for you, but nonetheless, you might just be ready for it when you reach that 100-mile. Mike Saunders, it's been great to have you on as a guest this afternoon, and my very best for your continued success.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Extrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.